hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of The Hybrid. I'm Sean Collins, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Eric Gunderson up in Maine. And this program, if you're not familiar with it, is where we're really trying to merge cannabis and cannabis policy with maybe some pop culture or current events. Before I ever became a regulator, before the meetings and the headlines and all the politics, I met a guy at a bar in Massachusetts who had a really great idea and was very passionate about it. He thought cannabis didn't have to be something you hid, that it could sit on a table next to a beer or a bottle of wine. He wanted to make a drink that felt normal, social, predictable, something you could share with friends without having to explain yourself. The guy was Eric Rogers. At the time, I thought it was a clever idea. Years later, it became LEVIA, a zero-sugar, fast-acting cannabis seltzer that frankly redefined how people in this state and now, as we're seeing across the country, thought about edibles. He and his wife, Kristin, who came from the world of mental health counseling, built it out from their garage. No investors, no roadmap, just kind of stubborn conviction, caffeine probably, and a belief that there was room for something better than hangovers and anxiety. What they built took off. LEVIA became a statewide success, the rare cannabis brand that crossed age, gender, and culture. They sold to a national operator, stepped back, stepped away, and then, in a move that's almost unheard of, especially in this industry, they bought it back. Not for nostalgia, but because it mattered to them. Since then, they've launched Second Act, a new venture that blurs the line between cannabis, food, and culture. Think like infused olive oils, chocolate marshmallows, collaborations with chefs. It's obviously creative, but it's grounded in the same time, which is exactly how they are. Their story isn't about business. It's about what it means to build something that feels like you, to risk it, lose it, and find your way back to it. It's about staying human inside of an industry that often forgets how to be. And that's what we're trying to do on this show, to talk about the people that are building the future of cannabis with equal parts intention and, I guess, chaos. So again, as always, we're joined by my co-host, Eric Gunderson, another recovering regulator who's had to build things from scratch too and live with those consequences in real time. So, Eric Gunderson, you and I have watched this industry evolve from an idea on paper to something real and unpredictable. When you hear a story like this, like LEVIA, and Eric and Kristin's backstory about creation, loss, success, coming home again, is there anything that sort of resonates with you first? Or again, welcome back and good to hear from you again. But what's your take on this?
I mean, you can't help but feel good having these types of conversations with these types of people. Look, when everybody thinks of cannabis regulators, their first thought is, okay, why are they there? It's to protect the public's health and safety, right?
Why do they suck?
Yeah, why are they such a pain in the ass? No, but it's seriously like you're in that role to make sure that you're doing this the most responsible way possible for all stakeholder groups involved, not only the people that support cannabis, but also the people that were anti-cannabis, right? You have to manage all of those different thoughts, positions, and stakeholder groups. But I was always adamant that, like, yeah, that was my primary objective to be there. But I also wanted to create a cannabis program that was fair, that was competitive, that could give legal businesses the chance to compete, really, which can be difficult. We've talked about the economics of these state cannabis markets plenty of times in the past. It's very challenging, but I really felt like it was the obligation or the duty of the regulator to help create that type of program. So to meet Kristin and Eric, thank you so much for both joining today, letting us talk to you and get to know you and let the listeners hear more about the work that you're doing. But yeah, you can't help but feel good when you hear some of these success stories, because certainly you want the programs to be successful, but it's tough in the moment as a regulator to really bring it down more to that human level. So now that, as you put it, we're both recovering regulators, we're able to have more of these human level conversations with folks. And I certainly appreciate talking to folks that you, Shawn, used to regulate, so I can get the real skinny on
I was waiting for
the
that.
real
Yeah.
the real skinny on Shawn the regulator.
The
So
shit talking. Yeah.
yeah, Kristin and Eric, I can't thank you enough, and I'm really excited. When I saw the notes to prepare for this episode, I got excited about the conversation we're about to have, and really to hear your story more than anything because it sounds really cool.
What an intro.
Yeah,
Like
thank
tearing
you.
up.
Yeah.
But
Thanks.
I think it's a great place to start, like in outside of the shit talking aspect. But and Eric, I'm not sure if you have many success stories like LEVIA from your market, but we'll maybe talk about that later too. I guess, Eric, I mentioned it. We met in a bar. But I go back to that moment, and again, like I mentioned at the outset, I was not a regulator yet. LEVIA was sort of in your imagination, and and I think bringing me back to that moment. It wasn't that long ago, but it feels like ages, I'm sure, and it definitely feels like ages for you as well. I think you both have lived a lot of lives in between. We all have. But remembering that, you were talking about a process to sort of emulsify and extract. And if you weren't, I was sort of familiar with cannabis, I had an interest in cannabis policy. But back then it was like, sure, that sounds really interesting. Like, good luck. But obviously,
I did get that vibe. Yes.
yeah, good luck and good fortune definitely came your
Go
way.
get
But
'em.
what were those early conversations like back then when you were pulling it together? As like, I have an idea. And I think how many people can relate to that as far as like, I have an idea, but you did it, you pulled it off, and obviously to wild success. So what were those conversations like back then?
So to be honest, that opportunity where we met in that bar was incredibly helpful. I
hear
know
that,
I was
Eric
just
Gunderson?
telling you an idea, but to connect with somebody that had the perspective of the policy, that was one of the missing pieces because like the regulations, I don't think had even really been released when we met. So it was like, I have this idea, but I knew it needed to live within a framework that didn't exist yet. So kind of throwing some ideas your way and just getting your perspective on what some of the challenges might be from a regulatory perspective really helped me to start thinking about how to solve the problem in a different way, right? It sort of accepted the fact that there's going to be this unknown framework that may or may not be beneficial to our business. And how do we thrive within that? And, I heard your advice in my head, after I gave testimony to the commissioners about multi-serve beverages and what was going
Yeah.
on in other states. And I was respectfully told, cool, we don't care. And thinking like, okay, well, I could throw my hands up and be done now, or I can figure out how to make it work, within this framework, knowing now this is sort of what we're working with. So, for me, that interaction was extremely valuable. And then, yeah, when ultimately down the road you were appointed as the executive director, I was excited because I knew that you at least had a even-keeled approach to this stuff. And I very much respected that you were doing the same thing, right? You had to build something from nothing. Only you had the like actual government framework to work within. So that was your framework to work within. Then you need to create our framework and all of that. So I was respectful of that process, but also excited because candidly, not that I thought our early conversation mattered as much to you as it did to me, but hey, I had a conversation with that person. And it was at least, as someone that's trying to pull an idea from the ether, build the building that we're standing in with the amazing team that came together to make it happen. And just to clarify, we did have to fundraise once we realized we needed this.
Sure,
I
yeah.
needed to move out of the garage, and the regs weren't going to let us do that.
Lots of
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, that was a wonderful opportunity that really helped shape, a lot of the way we approach things from that point forward. So
Speaking of garages too, I was doing some homework and trying to read up on your journey. I read something funny. I wonder if you can confirm it for me. That I think it might be in your facility today. Was it an 8-foot garage door that didn't fit 2 pallets across? It was like 8 feet 2 inches or something. And like, speaking
we've
of
had a
garage
lot
doors,
of
right?
those. Yeah, we've had
Yeah.
a lot of those challenges where things don't fit when we order them. I mean, back in the day, I got pallets of cans delivered to my house because you couldn't just order a couple of cans, right? And they would just get dropped in the road outside of my house, and I didn't have pallet jacks and things in my house. There's a comical video of me like pulling it on my lawnmower, like on a push cart, like just trying to figure it out. But yeah, no, there were a lot of those things. I mean, early days, we had an ultrasonic sonicator in the room above our garage that I would clear the house out, including my dog, get everybody out of the house. We had ear protection, all that stuff. I had a ground wire going down 2 stories and attached to a fence, like to start creating these emulsifiers to get these early proofs of concept that we were doing. So yeah, there were a lot of wild stories along
See,
the
this
way.
brings me back to that conversation in the bar when I was like, good luck. That sounds, yeah.
Yeah.
What could go wrong? Good luck to you. Enjoy.
Yeah.
We'll see you on the regulatory side.
Yeah.
But I guess what made you think beverage? Like what was sort of because I think it's at the time, and I think, again, fast forward to today, makes a lot of sense. It's actually sort of the topic du jour in a lot of states, but it wasn't in 2017, 2018. What brought you to beverage as a medium ultimately?
Yeah, and I could not agree. In those early days, I got laughed out of more rooms than I was accepted in. With the "What do you mean you're going to drink it?" Like it just made no sense to anyone.
It's gross. Yeah.
Yeah, just it made no sense. But the sort of path that got me there was really actually, sort of between us in that I was a medical cannabis consumer. It helped me tremendously with some back spasm pains that I was having in my late 20s. Traditional medicine was not getting it done. It was muscle relaxants, anti-anxieties. I wasn't functional. And someone recommended to me, like, have you thought about medical marijuana? And, this is before even the state had a medical program, all of that. So I was really uneducated, but was very fortunate to sort of be surrounded by some people who knew more than I did. And I gave it a try. And I had tried cannabis before, like I had been a recreational user, but with the intent of sort of like, I have a problem I'm trying to solve for. It really changed my whole perspective on the plant and what that was. Fast forward a few years, we were starting to have kids. You mentioned the family aspect of this.
Yeah.
And, Kristin looked at me and she said, I've no problem with you being a medical cannabis consumer, but now we have kids. We're starting a family. We know that smoking is bad. How can we, kind of move away from that behavior? And I was like, great, edibles, no problem. I'm just going to get into edibles. So I started making edibles at home and trying to figure out dosing and all of that. And I realized that I have the worst metabolism and that edibles for me still take 3 hours to kick in if I take a traditional edible.
Yeah.
And that was hard in those rescue environments, right? So I had that classic experience where it was 4 o'clock on a certain day and my back is killing me. I'm stressed out. I brought one of my little brownies in a little tinfoil thing and I'm like, I'm going to be out of here in an hour. So I'm going to take this now. So by the time I get home, all of this, then a work emergency comes up at 7:30 and I am high as a kite talking to clients. And I'm like, this isn't good. I need something that's more predictable. And really where that led me was tinctures. Because the sort of my ADHD rabbit hole sort of started with like, okay, if cannabis doesn't like water, what does it like? Like was sort of like I got curious about it. And it also liked ethanol, that it would attach to that molecule. So in my head, I was like, well, alcohol kicks in quick. So if I can attach it to that molecule, that should make it kick in quick and I should get a more predictable result. The problem was that it tasted terrible. These were very rudimentary tinctures that I was making. So naturally I put my brand marketer hat on and I was like, well, I have to make the experience not terrible. So I started making mocktails using a lot of fresh citrus, all of these things. And ultimately I felt like I got pretty good at it. And at that point, there was a day where we invited a bunch of friends over for just a brunch. We all have kids. We're all young kids, all under one. So our alcohol consumption had taken a steep drop off at that point because no one wants to have a hangover and a baby. You do that once and then you regret it and you want to avoid it from that point forward. And I
think
looked
we
at
can
my
all
friends.
relate to that, right?
Yes.
Gundy?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So I asked my friends if they would be open to me getting them high in a different way. And none of them knew what I was really talking about, but trusted me. And this was definitely back in the day before I had any type of way of measuring it. I was just sort of like free pouring as I went and I knew what worked.
Man, I
for
want to
me.
be invited to that brunch. Yeah.
So we made
Bottomless mimosas.
Well, so this was the birth of the Bloody Mary Jane, right? It was sort of like what we made that day. And about a half an hour later, everyone that I had served this to comes back over and surrounds me and was like, "What black magic did you just do? Like, we are all so high right now." And one of my friends, who is a much larger individual, like just taller, he's 6'4", a former, D1 athlete, all of this, just looks at me deadpan and goes, "I need to be 35% less high to be a good dad right." And it was
Can't
something
feel my toes.
yeah, it was something about him quantifying it that like that light bulb went off about dose. I was like, "Oh my
Exactly.
God." This was 2013 and I'm like, "Dose. Everything's about dose." His dose is different than my dose. The same way he could drink, 4 old fashions and I'm on the floor on one, right? Like it's different. And then he said, "Yeah, you're the one more guy. If we're ever smoking, you're always like, yeah, I'll take one more. Like you have a higher tolerance." And all of a sudden it contextualized it. So spent a year or two really creating all these mocktails and beverages and all of this. Meanwhile, Kristen's, working on the front lines in the opioid epidemic. She's
Exactly.
having her own experience with like cannabis, seeing it as an exit drug, seeing the medicinal benefits of it. So we just started kind of ideating of like, well, how do we normalize? And we're putting it in a drink, but we're still asking the consumer to do something. So the consumer marketer and me, I was sitting on a beach next to my brother. I had made a seltzer and spiked it with my tincture, and it tasted god awful. And I just looked at him and I said, "What if there was a drink that you could get in a container, a can, a bottle, something that didn't taste like shit and got you high?" And he was just like, "That would be incredible." And I was like, and in that moment, I was like, "That's it." And for me, again, selfishly, I drink seltzer, beer, and whiskey is kind of the 3 primary liquids. So I was like, "How do we get a seltzer?" And in those
Yeah.
early days, we explored a lot. Was it a coffee? Was it a tea? Because coffee, tea, and water are the 3 most consumed liquids on the planet. So it's like if you're going to hedge your bet against a format, how do we do that? And ultimately, seltzer. Thank you, White Claw, in 2018,
Exactly.
because all of a sudden that contextualized what we were doing in a way that like I couldn't have done ourselves, right? Like we couldn't have done that ourselves because all of a sudden there was a spiked seltzer. And now I could start talking about this as a spiked seltzer. And all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, I get it now." And then we were able to say, "But ours isn't going to have calorie content. So you still have sugars and calorie content in those, and ours won't. And it'll kick in the same, just as fast and all of that." So really, it's like a beautiful kind of coming together of ideas and progress. So, I mean, it was, call it 3, 4 years in the making by the time the vote passed. And at that point, that was when Kristen sort of said to me, "We got to figure out how we're going to do this. We got to try. Like, this is an incredible idea. Let's try." And that was really the start.
That's a fascinating story. That's so good.
Right.
How you built
I
up
would
to
read
it, and
that
it's
book.
yeah, seriously. Seriously. And then making that's got to be a nerve-wracking moment too, because you have a family now and you're taking this, you're jumping in with both feet here into this unpredictable cannabis space, making these drinks, but just kind of trusting in yourselves and getting the feedback from your brunch companions there.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And the beverage folks there's like an equivalent of you in Maine too. There was a gentleman that was very I don't know if outspoken is the right word. He was very engaged in the whole legislative process when Maine was rewriting our legalization acts. I mean, just to go back a little bit, it was passed at the ballot. The legislature took that language because it was a hot dumpster fire, really, and rewrote it. And one of the gentlemen that was really engaged in that whole process when I was working in the legislature, he was incredibly helpful to me and me picking his brain, understanding the plant better, understanding the work that he was doing. Um, and then, much like your experience with Shawn, I become the executive director of Maine's OCP, and I still went to him for his knowledge and his background and his assistance. But he was a big beverage guy in Maine too. He was the first one that I ever heard saying, "You know what, I'm going the beverage route here." And I remember as soon as he opened his facility, I got a tour of it, and I was just like blown away by the setup, by the passion, by the vision. And you guys were right. You guys were right.
So I'm a brand marketer. Like that's what my training was. I spent 15 years at advertising agencies working with big blue chip brands. So like I was always fascinated by the opportunity to like create a brand, right? To create a brand that consumers could connect with. But breaking down, yeah, all of the different process flows of like how do you create then a product with all the checkpoints of where you need testing and all these things. So like I ended up just breaking all these problems down into individual things, and I would try and figure. I still have as like a from back then, I had a whiteboard where I sketched out the whole process flow that we still use today of the checkpoints of, where we have to test the product, what are the waiting times, how fast could we turn tanks, all of that stuff. And really that all rang true. And it was that initial whiteboard concept that really fed into then, how do we design this facility? How do we make the processes go? How does everything work together? But I mean, it was hard to kind of figure that out because there were maybe 6, 7, 8, people trying to make a go at beverage out in the West, and maybe only 1 or 2 of them were emulsifying. It was usually just oil and water, and you had to shake it up, and that was an awful experience. So we were
Yummy.
trying to
Yeah.
bring it forward a little bit in our execution. Though I had no idea how to do it, I just knew what we wanted to do. We had to figure it out along the way.
And Kristin, I'm interested to get your perspective too, especially from, you have that therapy and addiction background, and Eric sort of touched on it too, but how did that work shape some of the values behind LEVIA and what you were doing? And obviously I think that background and seeing Eric's experience as a medical patient, like, I'm curious how you brought that into the company from your perspective and your background.
So, it was really interesting. So really, like, simultaneously as Eric's having these, great experiences with, this man had like debilitating back pain. And so I was witnessing all these great things. And then at the same time, I finished my master's degree. I went to work for this great nonprofit in Massachusetts. And they were a direct vendor for the Department of Mental Health. And I'm in this program where I'm on the streets of Boston, Lynn, all these cities in Massachusetts, and I'm in mental health centers and courtrooms, and I get to a point where I'm aware that cannabis can be this helpful medicine. I can't get people into rehab when they're dying from opioid abuse because they're using cannabis. And so it was infuriating. Like, I couldn't even believe it. The first time it happened, I have this very clear recollection of being on the phone with an out west rehab center. This person was an alcoholic and using opioids at the same time. They were willing to go in. They're sitting with me, and the intake coordinator explains that, this whole explanation of what's going to happen. They can't use cannabis. If they've got cannabis in their system, they're going to have to go through a separate detox first. And then also, they can't use cannabis in the next 6 months when they're at, a halfway house or like these sober. And I even knew at that point that people weren't dying of cannabis. They were dying of opioids. Like,
Exactly.
there was even a turning point where I remember very specifically being in politics. I'm sure you guys remember this too, where it seemed a little bit more manageable. And then it was like overnight, everyone was dying. It was like something hit the streets, and all of a sudden we went from only having to deal with like occasional use to it became really cheap to get opioids.
Mm-hmm.
And it was terrifying. I mean, I was finding these people that I was working with for years dead in their homes, and it was awful. Meanwhile, I'm being told I can't get people into rehabs because they're using cannabis. And I knew inherently that this was a problem. And I worked with these great people in this program, psychiatrists and nurses, and we all knew that harm reduction was such a huge piece of the puzzle. Using harm reduction for anything. I mean, for heaven's sakes, like, I drink very little alcohol now because of LEVIA. It's really
Right.
fun to have a product that you also enjoy. Even if it's not a problem, it's just so helpful. I feel much healthier, and here we are in this situation where we can't help people. We don't have the research, we don't have anything, but I'm surrounded by these amazing humans that are also helping to get people off the streets and keep them healthy. And we all know that cannabis is helpful in these situations, but we have nothing to go with. We have nothing to go by to help people. And so I'm coming home and I'm telling Eric these stories, and we're both sort of like, what is happening here? How is this? And then, of course, you start learning about the history of cannabis and the racial disparities. And it became such a passion for both of us for so many different reasons to, be part of this. And I feel so lucky that we were at a time in our lives where this was all happening. 5 years before, 5 years after, so different, right? And I think we're so lucky to have sort of converged in the same spot from two wildly different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's like the most impressive or sort of like kismet part of it is like you came at it from your different perspectives, but you sort of met at LEVIA. Like LEVIA is sort of like the product of that collision in serving that purpose. And I think, Eric, to your marketing and brand background, and Kristin with your addiction and substance use background, like in sort of solving and also I think the awareness you're creating both then and now continue to create around like the lack of, it doesn't have the hangover of alcohol. It doesn't have the sort of like the downside addiction problems of alcohol. It normalizes and destigmatizes what can be medicine. And I think I'd love to talk more about sort of how do you wedge that into a regulatory scheme and a legal scheme, because LEVIA as an adult use product, the dosing issues as far as, multi-serving or higher potency and that sort of thing, knowing that and Eric, you sort of alluded to it, like tolerance is a thing, like dosing's a thing, sure, but so is titration and tolerance. And, a 5 milligram beverage doesn't really resolve that for some people. So I'd love to, I'm sure we'll talk about that as we get deeper into this, but I guess I'm curious too, was there ever a moment, because this is the story thus far is like, wow, like a lot of luck happened. A lot of things went right during that process. There had to have been moments though, as you're building this out, never mind just the like, how do I do this? Or like, this tastes like shit, I need to fix that. Or like, were there moments though where it's like, I don't think this is going to work. I think like this is a roadblock. This is it. This is like, we found it. This is the spot. Or were there smaller moments where it's like, I got to solve for this, but it's solvable? I guess I'm curious, like, it couldn't have all just been like green lights down that road.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, the path was riddled with zigs and zags, not the least of which was a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Forgot about that.
Yeah.
We had just spent all of 2019 in planning board land with the town of the town of Georgetown that we reside in. And, we were delayed, that took weeks to get through that metal building. Really the sticking points were twofold, mostly with conservation. Apparently so our building abuts Interstate 95 here, and we are Interstate 95 and overpass. And apparently through snow removal process, like over years, there was now an artificial wetland that had been created within the buffer zone of the corner of our property, which then meant that we had to restore all of this land. So we had to kind of create a retention pond, do all this extra stuff. And mind you, we were taking over a vacant junkyard. We thought this would be a piece of cake.
Right.
We're beautifying this part of the town. We're bringing tax dollars, all of this. But between the artificial wetlands and then concern around the general public driving up I-95, happening to look right, see through the fences, the forest that's there, the unmarked new building was there, that they might have an inkling that it's cannabis and think less of Georgetown. We then
Sure.
kind of
I've
had
heard
to
that.
insulate that with an extra 24 trees, that we had to plant along the property line and all of this. So it was like battling over sort of inconsequential things. We got through that in December of 2019. We're off to the races. Everything's great. When the whole world shut down, we had 3 exterior walls built of the building, and then it just stopped. So it was like the most meaningful progress we had, and we were at a standstill. And
like
that
a
was alarming.
tangible standstill. It wasn't a paperwork standstill. Like that was like a physical, like you could see it, touch it, and yeah.
And I would say that dovetailed in with some conversations that we had been having where suddenly, because of these roadblocks, we sat time and we're trying to take stock of everything we had done. Doubt started to creep in, amongst the team of all of that. Of did we select the right equipment? What if this doesn't work? What if this doesn't work? And all of that. So I spent early days of COVID driving around the state, buying up products that were canned on the same canning line that we had so that we could check carbonation levels and see how we thought, talking to the manufacturers, really trying to validate everything we had done so that we could get ahead of any potential issues that came once we really had the opportunity to like build this out to the scale that we were trying to. So there was definitely a lot of doubt, a lot of zigs and zags, so many things that just took much longer. As you learn in cannabis, everything does. Uh, but we stuck it out as a team. But also I would say that's in part as a team what contributed to the quick sale, right? Was that we were all really ground down through the process, and it took its toll on each of us in a different way. So it was all part of it. But yeah, it was by no means all green lights. I just like to remember the green lights. More so than the red ones.
Well, I mean, that's a good segue to the question that I've been thinking of. It's kind of a two-part question. So we get to the tail end of COVID, or things shake loose with the cannabis program, and now we're able to start acting like normal individuals and human beings and conducting ourselves on a daily basis. Um, at what point, or first, let me start with when you first got your product on store shelves. I want to know, like, how did that feel? Um, but also, when did you know that you really had something, and like, oh my gosh, our vision is coming to fruition, like it's actually happening. We were right. How did that happen? How long did it take for that to happen? And just kind of a feel good moment. Like, how did that feel at the time?
I would say really after the summer of White Claw, really 2018, 2019, all of a sudden we had a $4.8 billion spiked drink market that just hadn't existed a few short years ago.
Yep.
And thinking about the differentiators that we had with 0 calories, 0 sugar, everything that we were sort of marching towards, we really felt like we were building a rocket ship at that point. And that continued to become more and more clear as we're pacing things with the CCC, working through all the approvals. And, part of that is filling all the tanks, right? And our sales guy sold every single drink before they were even out of that tank. There was such remarkable
Nice.
acceptance to the market. So that was really exciting, almost to the point where I think we almost got dinged because the marketer and me put out a press release about how, hey, we're going to get our commence operations soon. We're coming because like, that's just what we do. And then the CCC reached out and were like, we didn't tell you could do that. And we're like, oh no, what did we do? Did we just screw it up at the last
Like,
step?
I
Yeah.
remember that. Yeah.
We call Sean Captain No Fun. So just
Yeah,
tell him to
that's-
relax.
That sounds
Just
like
tell him to
me.
relax.
That
We were
sounds
said,
fun.
you created the illusion that you're operational now, even though we know you're not. And I was like, but
you
we're
weren't
not.
the only one in that like
No, I know.
energetic, eager. So you're in company. I'm not sure if it's good company, but you're in company.
Yeah, no, I know. That was so that was also a moment of complete panic of like, oh my God, like we need to ship these drinks. We have a staff of people here that we brought on. We need to start generating like revenue. We were like at that point where the money that we had raised like all went into the building, the equipment, all this stuff, and we had just enough to get us where we needed to be in that moment.
And it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, what I read was like the meteoric rise was like, I think it was like a 5 million milestone, right? Like $5 million milestone that sort of was that year one. And then from there, it was like off to the races. But I'm sure that's probably when the term acquisition came into your orbit of we've got something here, but also we've got something that other people are looking at. And, I think hearing sort of dating back to that brunch and that experience of sitting on the beach and fast forward to the moment where it's like, wait a minute, are we ripe for acquisition? And are we one of those brands that is going to emerge into this market? And the big guys are looking at us now. What goes through your mind then, right? Like it's being like this thing is, like we said earlier, like you're starting a family. This thing's sort of part of that story too. And it's like, how do you consider like, one, we did it, like that's a success. Oh my goodness, we built something that someone else wants to acquire. But also like, it's got to be worth more to you than anyone else. And so how do you sort of reconcile that emotionally? And like, is it fear? Is it anxiety? I'm sure it's excitement, but also like as a family, how do you go about making that decision as far as, are we going to do this? Is that something that is right for us? And is that something that we want? Like, I guess, how do you process all of that?
So it was painful, first of all. It felt, soon, abrupt. It was like, oh my gosh, and it wasn't just one of the multi-state operators. It was pretty much
Exactly.
every multi-state operator that was knocking on the door. And yes, that should have felt like success, but it felt disorienting, right? Of like, for me, it was more of a green light of keep going. Like we're making enough of waves right now to do this. But similar, as now a parent of three, you always want the best for your kids, right? And from our perspective, we launched this rocket in Massachusetts. And at the time, expanding into other states was going to be costly, right? There wasn't a lot of infrastructure that existed in any other legal states that we could have access to. So it was like, okay, are we going to go back to it and start raising more money? Or do we, partner with one of these multi-state operators who already have licenses, who already have real estate, and have some cash to burn to invest in this capital intensive part of the industry to really throw gasoline on this fire that we started. So, when we came together on this, really for us, it was like, well, what's our goal? Well, the goal was always for LEVIA to exist, for LEVIA to be in the national conversation for cannabis beverages, right? To help destigmatize, to normalize, to make things more approachable, right? For us, the whole brand concept, I really latched on to Kristin's harm reduction aspect of things,
Yeah.
right? And cannabis can be confusing, right? You've got all these different strain names. They're supposed to make you feel different ways and all of that. So it really led into our archetypes of how we built the brand, right? We wanted to simplify for consumers. That's why we created Achieve, Celebrate, and Dream, so that every time you went and bought an Achieve drink, you were going to feel uplifted and energetic and cerebral and want to get stuff done. Where Celebrate's more of that backyard barbecue, upbeat, social, and relaxed. Dream, hey, you want to relax and melt into the couch, have that movie night with your partner. Perfect for you. You'll have laughs all night, right? So I did take a lot of pride in like they were coming after us for the brand, not for our license, not
That's
for,
right.
like all this. It was for that brand that was resonating with consumers in this remarkable way right now. So, for us, it was sort of, okay, how do we put the personal preference aside that we would love to see this forward, right? It'd be like my 12-year-old going to college tomorrow. I'm not ready, but hey, if she's ready, I got to be supportive of that, right? So really that was sort of my approach and how I was able to really rationalize it and then look at it as an opportunity to really take some time for myself, to be a dad, right? At that point, we were three kids. We had our third and final in 2019. And like, this was, 2022. And I'm like, I barely know that little person and I want to spend time with that. So, being able to also reframe it is like, okay, even though it doesn't feel like success, this is success. And this creates another opportunity that is equally as important, if not more important to my heart and myself to really pursue being that parent that I always wanted to be, and lean in and be grateful for that opportunity.
And so you mentioned all of them came knocking, right? Like which again, I think is a testament to, if there's universal interest, then like there's something there. And also that tells you that, to me, that validates a couple things. One is, yes, the brand was resonating. It was, it was simple to understand. People were flocking to it or they were gravitating to it, but also it was proving concept as far as beverage was concerned. If that product line or that sort of medium was available, I mean, ultimately you successfully exited to Air. What made them the right partner in your mind? Like what you had to, obviously there's sort of a speed dating round. I'm sure it was even more intimate than speed dating at some points, but why Air then? Like what made them the right partner in your estimation at that point, based on your personal story, but also for the success or the future of LEVIA? What made them the right steward of that?
100%, they were the most experienced operators at that point. And, as far as we could tell, the uh, had the best financial prospects of the group. Like some of them were just pure money at that point. So having people that had already been successful in the cannabis space in different states was huge. and a really important piece of that.
The other piece was like their footprint really aligned with what our strategy to expand
Sure.
was at
Yep.
the time. So where they had, access to licenses and facilities, we felt like were high value markets that we could, kind of build off of the first mover advantage that we got here in Massachusetts and just keep pushing that forward was really sort of what the collective vision was as we were having that speed dating round. And, ultimately to Kristin's point, like they seem the most well capitalized at the time to really be able to push these bigger projects forward since a canning line alone is starting $125,000, right? So it's like they're not small numbers to start saying like, oh, we're going to build out another facility to sort of outfit this. So it was a lot of those factors that were coming in, and a team that was experienced operators that had had success in multiple other industries as well. It was sort of like, okay, they've figured out a lot of different industries and they've figured this out because, Eric came together by way of the SPAC concept. So like it was a really high performing team who had been together a lot. And, there's a lot of confidence there of like, 1+1 could equal 3 really quickly there.
And it's just for our listeners' sake too, because I think what some people don't appreciate, or it just may not logically occur to them, is it wasn't as if like, oh, we're going to start shipping to Connecticut now. We're going to start shipping to Rhode Island. We're going to start shipping to Ohio. You didn't have that capacity from your facility in Massachusetts because of the regulatory nature of cannabis. So to produce into Ohio or Florida or any other state, you had to set up operations in that state. And to your point, like it's not as simple as making a gummy. It's not as simple as just here's our recipe. You had a process. And so I think just so people understand and appreciate, you had to replicate a lot of what you were doing in Georgetown. You couldn't just scale Georgetown. You had to replicate it in that jurisdiction. And that's where I think Eric Gunderson and I, as also our other peers and colleagues, we start to see some of these brands creep into a state and we're like, wait a minute, are they licensing their IP? Are they setting up? They don't have a license for that. Like, so we see a lot of it from the regulatory side, from a compliance standpoint of, all right, who is this brand? And so, but in your instance, I think beverage is a little bit more complicated in that sense because of all of you've got to can it, you've got to have the equipment, you've got to have, it's not just as simple as like, here's our molds, here's our recipe, like have at it. It's far more complex.
So yes, but also that was where we kind of, went back to the beginning, right? It all started with a tincture. So back
That's
then
right.
we weren't allowed to call them drink drops. It was a
Great
little more
point. That's where I was headed, was scaling that exactly.
it was very important to us for the product that sort of inspired it all, like to bring that to market as well. And really it was like, how do we bring a tincture to market that is water soluble, that can be mixed into a drink? But, where we kind of ran into challenges there is like, it's really hard to educate consumers, right? First, we had to educate the bud tenders, then we had to educate the consumers. And like at the time, there were such limited opportunities, right? But part of really leaning in on that tincture product was that could be the tip of the spear in a new market, right?
Mm-hmm.
That equipment isn't as capital intensive. It's not as huge a footprint. That equipment can sit on an 8-foot table and you've got a whole production line to be able to put that out. So like that was part of it, was that like, hey, we can start to get into a new market with this other product that's not as well known. But if we're riding the brand awareness that we've created in Massachusetts, we're known for drinks. So how do we start expanding into these new markets with this easier, smaller, easier to make, easier to ship, all of that thing product format? And that's what we started to do, with Air, was what we did. We got into Florida, better than I do.
Florida, Ohio, Arizona, Nevada. We were about to launch in New Jersey, but the overhead is just so much less for the tincture. And not everyone, still to this day, not every regulated state even allows beverages. Pennsylvania still doesn't allow beverages. I'm pretty sure Ohio still doesn't allow beverages in the regulated market. So there's this,
Vetted stuff. Yeah.
there is, it's a way around that. And to also, I think what's really important about the tincture is that there are people that 5 milligrams doesn't touch them.
Exactly.
I still continue to be 5 milligrams, which is awesome. But like Eric, he gets nothing from 5 milligrams. So how do we help more mature consumers get the dosaging that they need? And this is it.
That's right. Because I think that's an important point, is that that dosing combined with titration and tolerance is, and actually, ironically, I think Ohio, from a hemp standpoint, I think is poised to allow, I think it's 10 milligram beverages on the hemp side now. But that's like, that sort of gets back to the earlier comment of like, the phenomenon is sort of caught on wide scale at this point. And I think, again, you guys were one of the original pioneers and proof of concept of that. So, but Gundy, did you see this in Maine as well, as far as like a beverage explosion, and or was it more like, also the other thing that I want to get your take on is, I think we struggled with education too on the public side of what to expect, what is available, what is legal, what is not legal. So I can certainly resonate, or I can relate to the fact that public education, consumer education is always going to be a challenge.
I mean, in May, we were basically a year behind Massachusetts in launching our program. So the
You legalized
timelines
around
were,
the same time though, right?
well, let's not get into this. Let's here we go. Here we go. Um,
I think it was around this. It might have been the same day, I think, actually.
but we had a couple governors' vetoes, 2 years in the legislature. Cut,
Sure,
cut me
sure.
some slack
Right.
here.
I forgot
Yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
Yeah. Eric's fast to remind us about that.
But so we were a year later, so beverages were kind of a thing from the get-go, but you hit the nail on the head when you were saying it wasn't necessarily licensees. You would see new brands pop up, and of course, when we see new brands pop up, we're trying to figure out, all right, where do they come from? Who's actually operating? Like, what is this? Where's it coming from? Not that we were against it. We just wanted some clarity and know. Um, so that's kind of how it happened in Maine, and I think the beverage market here is still fairly strong.
It
Yeah,
is.
very.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, that's one of I wouldn't call myself a cannabis user. I do every once in a while, and that's exactly what I go to, is the 2.5 milligram, the 5 milligram beverages, for all the reasons that we've talked about at this point. Like, they set on pretty quickly, they're predictable. It doesn't have the smell of smoking. So yeah, I think it's a kind of a cornerstone of our program and our market up here, which I think is fantastic. And as I said, some of our early licensees were all in on it, which I actually think pushed it in that direction. But my question, Kristin, for you and Eric, to help me understand and help our listeners understand, after the partnership was formalized, I think a lot of people would assume, like, all right, we just sold the company, we walk away, we get money. But it sounds like you guys were still pushing your brand. You were still working. You were still in the trenches. It wasn't necessarily like a sale. Like, you still were the driving force behind the LEVIA brand. It was just a new relationship, leveraging infrastructure, capital. Is that is that the right way of explaining it? Were you still kind of the one leading the mission and vision behind the brand, just operating within a larger organization?
So I stayed. I chose to stay with Air. I mean, we had to work through this, during our wait and regulatory approval of what was going to happen. And my dream had always been to use this platform for good, right? How do
Yeah.
we educate, reduce stigma, get me out there? This was always my dream. So I worked with Air to sort of figure out, like, what is my role. So in addition to continuing to, I was the one doing all the pop-ups and doing
I was
all
going
that
to
stuff.
say, I thought you would have had the marketing background. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. But the first event I did once we were officially through regulatory was a expungement event. And it was amazing. It was exactly what I wanted. Like, that's why I stayed. So, Eric has his own journey in this, but the reason that I stayed with Eric specifically was to take care of our baby. Obviously, this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I mean, I was working 3 jobs because no one was making any money for a while we were up and running, and the passion became so innate in wanting this to succeed, but also using it for good as well. So I stayed with Eric. Still a lot of work here, especially when it came to licensing and whatnot. And then also traveled around, went to all the states that Air was in, talked to employees, worked through expungement events. It was really awesome to be part of a team. Like the DE&I team at Air was just amazing and force for good, and we're really focused on educating and making things better. And it was a really great experience. Whereas Eric had, a very different um plan.
Well, it sounds like you, I guess it maybe, but talk about the mutual benefit of that too, though, where, I mean, Kristin, you also got a pretty, like, almost like a MBA of sorts, like exposure to the behind the scenes of a massive, growing, expanding MSO. And then Eric, it sounds like you almost went back into the lab of like, all right, first I want to breathe and be dad and be able to do that. And obviously that was, I'm sure, the best use of your time, especially for your family. But then also it sounds like you might have gotten some of the creative juices flowing again. But also, again, how that works in your family unit is like, what a dynamic partnership of like the push and pull. But I mean, Kristin, I have to imagine that exposure to Air behind the scenes, just sort of, again, like talking about gasoline on a fire, probably just gave you that, like, what insight and like what a ride. And I'd love to get your sense of like what that was like, especially where here you had this growing small brand, right? Like I hate to call LEVIA, especially $5 million in sales, small at the point of acquisition, but like here we are now where we've sort of ascended to a different echelon or different level. What was that like too?
So you were totally correct about the MBA. The MBA in cannabis management. I think, what made this experience so great was getting insight into different parts of the business. Because even if I had worked years and years in retail, even if I had worked, years and years in finance or, all these other places, like you don't get the cannabis experience without being in a cannabis company. And because I'm loud, and also I think my thoughts and views really resonated with why a lot of people came into cannabis, right? So they let me into rooms, they let me be part of things that like didn't really have anything to do with me, but because of that I was able to add value where I could and also learn a ton. I mean,
Yeah.
if that hadn't been part of the process, I wouldn't know what I know now about finance, accounting, all the different states, all compliance in all these different states and how
Yep.
that works and legally how all these things work. I mean, yeah, MBA of corporate cannabis is definitely a great way to put it. So I am, I couldn't be happier that I've got that background now, which has been great.
Was there ever a point or a moment in that sort of the arc of this journey that the two of you maybe sat at home one night and were like, this doesn't feel like us anymore? Like this isn't, like, is something missing? Or like, I'm sure, Eric, again, I want to talk more about second act at some point too, where like you are thinking creatively, you're like, this is sort of, and also I've always appreciated and admired and sort of in awe of your ability to sort of see the landscape of like, not so much like this is the future, but like this is where I think things are going, or this plugs into an otherwise, like cannabis tends to wedge itself into cannabis specific things. Like cannabis is a brick and mortar retail store and we sell cannabis. It's like, well, wait a minute, why aren't we on a shelf in a store that sells other stuff too? And so here you are thinking about consumption and social consumption. Obviously, beverages are inherently social, but you're obviously, and again, I want to peel the layer back on second act in a bit. But was there a moment in the journey where you're sitting back and here you are brainstorming the next phase, and Kristin's maybe like, I was just in Arizona, I was just in Ohio, like something's missing. Like this doesn't feel like the moment where we're like, we've got to plant 24 trees so the highway, like, because those moments are like, that's your origin story. That's the like, we scrapped it together, we survived COVID, and now this feels like LEVIA has outgrown our tight knit family a little bit. Like I don't recognize it anymore. Was there a moment like that at all, or was it just sort of like we're too busy, like we're hustling, we're not even looking up, like we're blowing red lights now, never mind looking for green lights?
I would say that moment absolutely happened, and that's really where what led us back to buying it back, right? To have that opportunity.
Exactly. Sure.
I'm eternally grateful that Kristin, stuck that out and had that learning curve and all of that, and allowed me the space to, yeah, continue to create, to take some time with the family. But not to dive into second act, but it was along that journey that I was really intrigued by hemp. Because yes, the focus of second act was how can we support, empower, and usher forward normalizing cannabis in social settings, right? And then it became how do you integrate cannabis into those social settings when you have people of various tolerances overall, right? So yes, having the limitation of only a 5 milligram drink in Massachusetts was frustrating. But what's more frustrating is the broken consumer behavior in cannabis that you're going to pop one thing and we're all going to get to the same magical place that we want to be. Right. So, Shawn, when we met in that bar, we didn't both drink one beer and then be like, I can't believe that beer didn't do everything that we wanted it to.
Yeah, right.
We went
Yeah.
and got a second beer. Right. And that is the acceptable adult behavior. Right. That's same in the morning. I drank a coffee. I'm still sleepy. I'm not going to yell at the coffee that I'm not as awake as I want to be. I'm going to drink another cup of coffee. And it's that concept of like that
As I
intersecting
sip
with the
my
fact that
coffee.
like, there you go, intersecting with the fact that like we as adult consumers are used to those like single substance psychoactives, right? Alcohol gets you drunk. Nicotine makes you feel a certain way. Coffee makes you awake, right? Those were the things, but there is that repeatability in those experiences. It's not a one and done type experience. So for me, that was the opportunity of building off of what we started with beverage was like, okay, how do we just start continuing to destigmatize and lean in so that, hey, if I'm at an event and I need 100 milligrams, well, I might have 2 or 3 of the 5 milligram drinks, but then I'm going to have a salad dressing that's infused on my appetizer salad. I'm going to have an infused taco. I'm going to have a little olive oil over my ice cream at the end and really take it in. And I'm layering that experience. And through my own experience, what I would realize is through that layering, I actually needed less. When it was sort of a part of that, scene and setting goes so much into it. You're at that dinner party, all of a sudden, 50 milligrams, I felt fantastic. Like I had taken 100. And it was part of that overall experience. So it was like, how do we start to lean in on that? And I was very intrigued by all of these conservative markets that claim to have social consumption lounges. We have cannabis lounges. So I ended up on this trip. It was an incredible trip that came together. There were probably 15 people. These were other, retail operators. They were investors. They were kind of curious, non-consumers. And we all went down to Nashville because Nashville had 5 social consumption lounges that they kept toting were down there. And I was like, is this real? What is this? This is a loophole. So we went down there. We spent 3, 4 days down there. We hit every lounge. And in turn, I sort of had a built-in focus group that none of them realized that
Exactly.
they were really getting there. So we would get to a place and I would order everything on the menu for them and just put it out to see what they gravitated towards.
Alongside like 3 or 4 bachelorette parties and yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And, at this time, we were engaged with Chef Chris on the second act side. He had pitched me his hot sauce when LEVIA was, not even fully built yet. And, he came screaming back into my head. And one of the things that was being done down there were all of these sauces. I mean, it was everything, but because of the regulations, they were in 2-ounce jars and they were only 5 milligrams. And they would put these jars out on your table and then you'd get wings and you're kind of dumping sauce on everything. And I realized that it went back to dosing. Like there's no dosing in this. No one knew how much they got. One guy was building a Tetris thing with his tater tots because he was so stoned and didn't realize it. And, the other guys were all like, I got nothing. So it was a really interesting learning curve. And it was coming back from that trip where my perspective on what the hemp opportunity had truly evolved, that we sat down and talked about that in the context of LEVIA. And what did that mean? And how could that fuel the growth behind the brand, given this opportunity that beverage specifically is creating from a format perspective? Because we always thought beverages were approachable. They're innately social. You gather around the water cooler, all of that. So like, how do we now take that brand into the next step? And that was really the beginning of inadvertently opening up a discussion to really reacquire the brand.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just gonna say that was like a huge talk about timing. We I had formed these great relationships with their leadership and we are very CapEx heavy. that is beverage. And because the market tanked so quickly, we were never able to expand the way that we wanted to with the acquisition. And to not really anyone's fault, really, when you're thinking about it, like this was everywhere. They needed to put gummies first. They needed to put products that did not have large build outs first. And it was heartbreaking. It was really hard. So, I started having these conversations really early on, and hemp became a really big factor in that because MSOs, this was like January 2024, MSOs were talking about hemp, but they were staying far away because at that point, no one knew what was going to happen with hemp. And if they put any money into it, and like they had already spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this infrastructure, and so the first time we went to them with this thought
The
of
plan.
what can
It
we
was
do
yeah, we pitched them
to
hard.
fix this, and they said no to hemp. But then Curaleaf went public with going into hemp, and that changed everything immediately. They came back to us and said, "You want to buy it back?" And we said, "Yes." Yes, please. And that was almost 2 years ago, a little over a year and a half.
Oh, yeah, definitely 2
Um,
years ago.
yeah, definitely 2 years ago. And we right around that same time, all of this was happening. Eric and the guys at Second Act were really working hard to really push social consumption. And, beverage is such a huge piece of that. This is America. We're all used to holding a can and drinking something. I mean, Liquid Death, for heaven's sakes, like talk
Yeah,
about
right.
all
Only
the
I just put water in the can. Why did I have to put
Seriously.
ice in it?
Yeah.
Like, I feel so silly.
Make
Here
it
you
way
are spending
easier,
all this
wouldn't it?
money. And,
I know. It's just been easier.
I'm like
go
so
back to that beach and be like, what if we just take a can and put water in it?
Talk
Guys,
about
hear me
getting
out,
gas
hear
out
me
of
out.
water. I hope one day, I'm putting it out there, I hope I get to talk to them one day about them pitching that idea to someone
Yeah.
and see.
You
the
really
reaction.
think we're all that stupid? It's like, no, you actually are that stupid. Yeah, you pay more for water in a can.
Yeah.
Social consumption, though, I think, and Gundy, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. As far as the mistake I think people make when they think about or sort of imagine social consumption is more akin to hookah lounge than what we traditionally have for a social experience. And I think what you're doing through Second Act, and I appreciate that you've linked it back to LEVIA as well long term, because I do see the connection, is if that's the expectation, which is that sort of smoking, combustion, vaping, hookah sort of mindset, I think you are alienating the largest percentage of a prospective customer, including those that just like, I don't have to drink to go to a bar to have fun with my friends. I don't have to. I can be sober. I can be dry. Because there's still, I can grab a meal. I can watch the game. It's still a social environment. And I think what you're doing in imagining through Second Act, and I'd love to get, I have familiarity with your product line, but I think for our listeners as well as Eric Gunderson's sort of familiarity, I think what you're doing is creating this product line that accompanies social, right? Like it's ketchups, it's hot sauces, it's olive oils, like it's things that can be incorporated. But also, I think to the larger point you've been making throughout this conversation is to your own level and tolerance and expectation, and also to your own objective. Like if you just want to lighten the mood and like enhance the dinner party, then you can add the olive oil to your salad dressing. You can dip, you can put the hot sauce on your taco, but to your own portion. Like I'm not a big hot sauce guy personally, so I might just do a dab for that purpose, not because I'm looking to get a minimal amount of cannabis or THC into my system. But I guess, Gunderson, maybe the question to you is ultimately, like, social consumption, what are you seeing across the country? Like, are people, as they roll it out, I know you've worked with states around some of these concepts too, like how does a product line like a Second Act or a LEVIA sort of fit into what you're seeing across the country? And then obviously I think the conversation you guys introduced hemp, we just had a long conversation with one of our friends that works on the policy side. She's based out of the West Coast, just around like the farm bill and hemp and sort of the politics of hemp. But I really appreciate that you guys are bringing in the product side of it too, and what's possible there. Ultimately, I'd love, I'm sort of layering a bunch of questions here, I'm sorry, but your perspective as far as like hemp versus marijuana to me is kind of a dumb argument. It's THC at the end of the day. Like, I get the legal distinctions, but THC is still intoxicating. And so I think we have a public obligation to appreciate and respect that as much as we do the sort of the legal pathways into the product line. But Gundy, I guess I'd love to get your thoughts. And I keep just calling you Gundy just because we have two Erics. So although this might catch on.
I think you just asked 6 different questions of 3 different people and completely different topic areas. That was incredible.
Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind starting us off. And
No, I think this is like speaks to the credit of the work that Eric and Kristin are doing. When we talk about social consumption, regardless of what state you're in, it always does start with that. We're going to have a room with ventilation and you can go in there and you can smoke a joint, and you're just thinking to yourself, if you go back to what I was saying around, we need to create an environment that allows these legal businesses to be successful. Like no one's going to do that. And if they do, like, good luck being competitive. Who's going to go pay money, sit in a room just to smoke? And then what? And then what? I think of social consumption the same way. The second act is envisioning what social consumption is like. Cannabis doesn't need to be the showstopper here. It needs to be an ancillary part of another greater activity that brings people together. The example, Shawn, we've talked about this before. Like, the example that I always bring social consumption would be like, all right, you get a group of friends that go bowling. Why can't cannabis in a hot sauce when you order tacos? That's what I think of, like, what a successful on-site consumption world looks like. Or
do you
go to
do
a
a lot of
baseball
bowling?
game. No, I actually hate bowling, but people seem to like it, so that's why I bring it up. I'm much more of a golfer. All right, golfer, like, you can have the beverage cart could have cannabis products there. I mean, you're not looking at hot sauces or ketchup. Well, I guess you could. I mean, who doesn't love a good hot dog at the turn?
No,
But
you
this is
put
what I'm
ketchup on a
talking
hot
about.
dog?
Like, have cannabis be an ancillary part of a greater experience, and that's what makes it an on-site. That's what I view as an on-site consumption, or at least in a successful on-site consumption world looks like. And it sounds like the second act group, like, today is the first time I'm hearing about this. It sounds like it's looking in that direction with that vision and positioning themselves very well to, it maybe not be really what we have in our world today, but certainly I think that's the direction that we're going once people start to understand some of this stuff better.
So, our unpopular opinion amongst industry friends is that social consumption should not include smoking. We grew up in Massachusetts. I can remember in my lifetime when you could smoke indoors, but it has been a
Seriously.
very long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard to go backwards, right? Just in general. And
Smoking
when
or
you,
non-smoking for your seat today? Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and also you're looking at, huge issues with workers. What kind of lawsuits are going to come from that? You got people who are sitting in the smoke all day long. Once again, here we go. This is going to be a problem.
We
And
don't allow smoking in casinos in Massachusetts for
Right.
that
yeah,
purpose. And it was largely because of workers saying, I don't want to be a blackjack dealer at the
Mhm.
smoking section.
So with that perspective, the other sort of problem that we saw that we needed to solve on the second act side is that, similar to what I said earlier, like a social consumption experience, if it's not smoking, is not going to be popping a couple of gummies and staring at each other for 45 minutes to 3 hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So we really, focusing back on the dosing, we felt like you needed to be sure that any products that you're consuming in a social space are reliably dosed, but they have to be fast acting and they have to be delicious, right? It has to work into those key concepts. So along the second act journey, is where we actually developed what we call Elemental Jerry. It's a subsidiary of second act, and it is the technology that encapsulates the cannabis to integrate into any cannabis product plug and play. It's how we were able to make an infused hot sauce. It's how we're able to get creative in the types of savory products that we're putting out to really align with consumer needs, because our sort of leap of faith assumption, hypothesis was that entrepreneurs are going to be more creative than just opening a hookah lounge, right? They're going to
Exactly.
open a movie theater. They're going to open a bowling alley,
Right.
and they're going to open a Japanese style, like, the all those booths that you can close in, but instead you can listen to records and all this crazy stuff, and they're going to be individual experiences. There's going to be all of this cool stuff because entrepreneurs are way more creative than that. So really for us, we're like, not only do we want to create products to help support and contextualize what that could be, but we want to also provide the technology so that we can empower these great chefs for whatever they're trying to make, right? We can collaborate with them so that if you have a high-end steakhouse that has a demi glaze that goes on that steak, well, hey, we can take your recipe, bring it back, infuse it for you, and bring it back to you compliantly so that you can continue to carry through your vision, what you're trying to do. So really, that was the idea, the backbone behind Second Act was really integrating into the fabric of social consumption in that conversation to help contextualize it through these innovative product formats that are meant to be toppers that you add. You know, you don't have to be the amazing chef. You can just go buy a taco from the food truck and pull out a little bottle of hot sauce that's the hot sauce equivalent to hot sauce packets, and just a little taco for me, a little taco for you. And now we're having shared, social consumption experience. The other aspect that's interesting is like I'm firm believers, the Second Act team, firm believers that like, you've got this audience of baby boomers that are the most educated and most active audience that's reaching retirement age. They are also the children of the 60s and 70s and definitely love their cannabis, but they also led those anti-smoking campaigns of the 80s and 90s. So now they're stuck. They want to participate, they want to lean in, and many of them have found a product like LEVIA, but are also looking for more, right? Like they don't necessarily, they want different formats. So that's really what led to the idea behind Second Act was how do we continue to break that consumer behavior of it's one thing and done? How do you make sure you're creating predictable experiences for consumers, but now across a variety of formats, depending on how they want to consume it? And make sure that everything's delicious. And, that's really what we've been focused on the Second Act side. And now it does come together beautifully, and now you can get a spicy taco and then cool it down with a Levia. So it works really well.
Well, I think that speaks to the sort of the family you've built around, like product line family that is I view all of those things, maybe beverage sort of as a bit of a carve out, but as an enhancement to the experience. The existing, like I'm going to go to a taco truck for lunch anyway. I probably won't, but I might go bowling anyway. But you have all of those experiences where you're saying cannabis is not the cost, or is not the sort of the leader there. I'm not going for the cannabis. I'm going for something else. Cannabis is accompanying it as an enhancement. The other thing I think that Second Act has done, which I'd love to get your I'd love to unpack your vision a little bit, is you've also partnered with folks like Chef. You've partnered with Dinner at Mary's. Like you have sort of those. You're bringing in folks that are already doing this and saying, how can I help you enhance your own process? And like you mentioned, the demi glaze in the steakhouse is. I'm not saying to the chef at the steakhouse like you need to sacrifice anything. What I'm saying is I can enhance that, and you can then offer it to your customers, and their expectation remains the same because I appreciate that you have built something, and I want to be additive to it. I don't want to ask you to sort of, there's nothing gimmicky about it necessarily. It's instead like if you want hot sauce on your taco, if you want infused hot sauce on your taco, there's no drop off. It's literally the choice you're making. And that also, I think, it embraces the social experience of like, I'm good, thanks, none for me. Okay, I'm not missing out on anything. I still have the same flavor. They still have the, like, it sort of just enhances and adds to the experience. But I think also I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on like how that has gone as far as like the Dinner at Mary's and working with Chef. And because I think what you're doing is you're building a bit of an ecosystem too around, you're sort of leveraging their reach, but also you're getting their expertise as well. And like, it's a nice sort of synergy and partnership that I think you're building. And then again, LEVIA just sort of sits there as a perfect accompaniment to all of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the delays in the social consumption framework here in Massachusetts did not lend itself too well to this strategy. We were trying
Sure.
to when we thought, there might be that greater access so that we could really start to partner with those operators and do that. But it's sort of the idea behind Second Act is enabling social consumption. How do we do that? So by partnering with experts who are already sort of trying to have those conversations, create, and then ultimately what you landed on, Shawn, was create experiences, right? It's not the primary experience, but it is there to enhance whatever you're doing. So, conversely, the Beard and Blaze hot sauce launched in New Jersey over the summer and has been met with incredible success there, because they do have 3 lounges open, right? And, while Here in Massachusetts, one of our approaches was like, we brought food to pop-ups and events and all of that. And it would be a delicious chili that the chef made. And then we would just add a little hot sauce. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing, right? We'd bring caprese salads. We'd bring a queso dip and a nacho bar activation. You're just integrating it in what you want. And it was really just about the good food, right? And that was the advantage of having chef there to really create these recipes. So you go to our website and we have all these recipes and examples that you can follow that are all chef created recipes to make it easy for you. But at the same time, we're also encouraging you to go to the taco truck and just get a taco and put it on nice and easy. In New Jersey, when you talk about the regulatory framework, they can't serve food in the lounges. So that makes it a little tough. They can, as a consumer, get it delivered though, from an outside source. So what we did was go into the lounges and start partnering with the restaurants in the surrounding locations and create tasting menus, right? Hey, go get this. You can grab the olive oil. You can grab the hot sauce. You can grab these things. This is how you can create that. It then creates a bounce back for the consumer to go back into the dispensary if they didn't buy that product and they are feeling a little peckish. And then it helps support that local business and that there's QR codes to then, hey, just order and get it delivered to you right now. So that we're starting to connect those experiences. So, as we look at what those opportunities are in each of those markets, we're, similar zig and zag. How do you accommodate what that is? We've got these delays in Massachusetts. How do we work that to our advantage? How do we continue to just educate consumers that this stuff exists and you can integrate it into your lifestyle in a different way? So, second act is sort of beholden to the aspect of the places existing to really bring it home. So,
Yeah.
we're trying to be strategic and thoughtful in how we continue to expand, how, where do we, how do we partner in Massachusetts to continue to see this through and really be that solution for these operators as that comes about. And we're seeing some reception in New Jersey as we sort of bring that same story forward, knowing that they have more of that social consumption framework sort of operation right now.
Just so I'm clear, I'm no longer the regulator in Massachusetts. So
I know.
just so Eric Gunderson, before you give me grief, no longer responsible. So
It'd be super interesting if you were though.
and that's our time. All right.
Yeah, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, but maybe after we hit stop recording, we can get out a little bit.
You want to talk about hemp a little bit?
Sure.
Because I think what we are seeing across the country is hemp, right? Like I think and you touched on it. It's sort of emerged, and I think in Gundy, you saw it a little bit in the states you're working in, as far as hemp is sort of emerged as a I don't know how to put it, it's obviously federally legal under the Farm Bill. Like we don't need to unpack that as much, but I think it's allowed individuals that don't have regulated marijuana programs to access cannabis, because I'll sort of put hemp under the umbrella of cannabis. But obviously I think what we're seeing is beverages seems to be the largest form factor, especially around hemp infused, and it's hitting traditional retail. It's hitting liquor stores. It's hitting convenience stores, grocery stores, etc. But what it's proving is concept and market opportunity. And I think you're also seeing, and Kristin, you touched on it, that some of the larger players in the marijuana space are not even just dipping their toe; they're going full force into hemp. And again, I think it proves that you are ahead of your time with LEVIA, but also where does that put the future potentially of LEVIA, especially in the context of you guys have reacquired that baby and you are now the stewards and custodians of that. What does the future look like? What are your thoughts on hemp? And I guess I'd love to get your take on that liquor store approach. Again, it's nationwide. It's not just a Massachusetts or a Northeast thing, but like, how does that help? What is the long-term, how does that play into your strategy as far as LEVIA as a brand? And then maybe even if it does at all into a second act as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, we very much view it as an opportunity, right? Beverage, the format has really forced the conversation at a national level, as these are more widely accepted, right? It is that approachable format that we thought it was, and people are open to trying it. It goes back to the consumer behavior, right? You're not walking into a dispensary with the idea that I'm going to buy a drink, right?
Exactly.
Like that's not the frame of mind that you're in. So to have the opportunity to be in an environment where people are already, I'm going in to buy an intoxicating drink in some capacity, and then to have an end cap at a Total Wine that says it's a THC drink is a
Yeah.
tremendous opportunity, right? Where it gets interesting for us is sort of back to the basics of what LEVIA stands for, right? We are an effects-led brand. We are sourcing different types of cannabis strains. We extract them on site, and then we care and curate and put those into each of these effects. So how do we replicate in that a market that's really just focused on one of the hundreds of cannabinoids that are there? So we've been doing a lot of due diligence and research behind the scene around how do we replicate those using minors, right? Like how do we create a more dynamic experience for consumers, and also, how do we maybe shift the focus away from Delta 9, right? Because of how polarizing that topic is, how can we insulate the brand? Because it is both an opportunity and a risk, because that hemp, the hemp conversation at a national level could be changed just like that as well. So how do we approach, both with enthusiasm and strategy and opportunity, but make sure that we're both future-proofing ourselves towards potential unknowns, right? So
Yeah.
we're very excited about the opportunity to move into the hemp space. We actually we're probably about 3 weeks out from that becoming a reality. We are super excited to be partnering with the David Ortiz Children's Foundation for our launch event down in Florida, actually, on the golf course, as Eric said, of a place that he would like to try it. So we're excited to roll it out and just start connecting with consumers, and we're optimistic that this provides an opportunity for our regulated partners, right? Because that's very polarizing overall. So, given the hemp situation in Massachusetts where you really can't produce it, we have a facility in southern Maine that we use to start producing our hemp products. But really, we're optimistic that this gives us the opportunity to market in a way that we can't, in the
Exactly.
regulated market, and reach that higher audience. Because to the point that like consumers aren't going in looking for a drink, there are equally as many consumers that would go in if they knew a drink existed. And that's a really hard part to solve for. And hemp is creating that conversation opportunity to market and start that conversation with a national audience, to then hopefully then drive consumers in, right? And where do we think the future could be? Well, 5 milligram hemp drinks sit on a liquor store shelf, but the 25s, the 50s, the hundreds, well, those are in a dispensary, right? So that you can
Right.
use the liquor model to really gain awareness and drive consumer adoption and acceptance of this format, but then educate them and continue to drive them into the regulated market for when you have a consumer like myself that's like, wait, I want a 100 milligram drink. So now I'm not going to go buy them over there. I'm gonna have more confidence walking into that dispensary because I know what I want and I'm gonna go get that. So we're trying to kind of walk that line a little bit because we too, same as regulated dispensaries, have invested tons of money in our regulated infrastructure. So we're not going anywhere. We view this as another way to support that market, and continue to drive awareness among a broader consumer set, to get more liquid to lips.
I think New Jersey is a really great example, right? Is that I would have loved to go to New Jersey yet with the cans, but you can walk into a liquor store and get a 10 milligram drink. Why is someone going to go in a dispensary and get a drink when they can go elsewhere, get it for less? Um, and I think, on a good note, I think Massachusetts was right to take a step back from hemp and to take a broader look at this because, there is this fairness um, issue right now
Sure.
where
Yep.
we want to support these people that have kept us going, these retail locations that have kept us going this whole time, and make sure that they are not getting hurt by the hemp market. So we certainly do not want to cannibalize ourselves in this market. But Eric makes this great point where the marketing that we can do with hemp is so different, that someone who's maybe ordering it in Texas to direct to consumer starts realizing that beverages are a thing, and that marketing also gets to people in Massachusetts, and then they walk into their local dispensary. And, I'm super excited about, some of these fixes that we can make pretty easily. I think higher doses, we're the only edible that cannot do multi-dose servings. And it's infuriating, quite frankly, because, um, people really realized how easily they could get these hemp drinks, drive right over the line in Maine and get these drinks. It's really caused a lot of issues. A lot of beverage makers have left this market, which is really, and just gone fully hemp, whereas I think that there's a place for everyone.
We get probably between a half a dozen and a dozen emails a week from consumers in other states who've traveled to Massachusetts, tried the product, and are like, "I love this. Well, how can I get this where I am?" And to tell them, "Well, no, you can only buy it in Massachusetts," and all of that, they're just like, "What do you mean?" Like, I don't understand, like they don't even understand, and they just happen to stumble across it. So, the opportunity to really connect with that broader consumer set, to connect with consumers who travel to this stuff to get the good stuff to begin with is an exciting opportunity.
hmm
And
You just touched
Gunderson, you
upon so many.
mentioned our,
I
our
was just
last
gonna say we,
episode. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say we touched upon so many interesting little policy themes there, talking about the education of consumers in general around hemp and cannabis. We were getting dangerously close to what I think our ideal state is with tiered retailing. Is that what you're going to talk about? How I have this greater vision, like in these cannabis programs, we tier out cultivation, we tier out manufacturing. Why do we not tier out retail? And I think we're getting pushed further and further with some of the cannabis dynamics in the state to that model. I mean, I think we're still years away, but anyway, just a fascinating conversation. Shawn, what were you going to say to me?
Well, and you mentioned too in our last conversation, last episode, around sort of the dosing issue of the consumer, where there is a market to be served by a 50 or 100 milligram beverage. There's also a market to be served by a 2.5 milligram beverage.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, and I think, and Eric, I think you touched on in our last episode that would be your preference versus even the 5 or 10 milligram. And I wonder your perspective as manufacturers, just that, like, how do you assess that marketplace to determine, like, how many SKUs is too many SKUs, how few is too few, but just sort of how do you cater to a market that's like, that still requires such education. The other thing we talked about in our last episode was sort of like the concept of an ABV for alcohol. What is the ABV in the cannabis context, and how do people actually relate to that? Because again, I think Gundy, especially, like, that was one of the points that
Yeah,
you made in the last episode that I thought was really, it was one of
to
your
add
good
a
ones,
little,
which is,
yeah, to add
that's
a
why it
little
stuck with me.
color to that, our guest was on and saying there is a market for this. I was like, absolutely, I know there's a market for this. I'm one of those people, and I have family members that would be those people. Um, then why the hell is it so difficult to find a low dose beverage? You think about, we brought up the example talking about alcohol. What's the number one selling beer or beers across the marketplace? It's Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller's Light, like the low dose, low ABV. Like, so why why is it still hard to find 2.5 milligram, 5 milligram beverages? Everything you run into, what is the max? 10, 20. All right, that's what you see. Yeah, would love I didn't even think about tying those two conversations together, but how come we don't see more of those low dose beverages in the regulated marketplace?
It's the overhead. Because at the end of the day, if you're looking at your COGS, and and quite frankly, right now, because we are only 5 milligrams, everyone's our competitor. Because if you're going into a dispensary and you know what amount you need to get high, and you need more than 5, you're likely not going to pick our beverage. I think that probably the 2.5s, because you're right, people love the 2.5s. Like, this is a great concept, but when you add in everything that takes to go into that one can, the amount of money you're going to get from that in a dispensary is not going to make you any money.
So yeah, as you see the cost of the most expensive input continue to, come down to reality, right? As markets mature, you'll probably start to see some of those lower dose products, coming out overall. But the reason why you probably don't see more of them at the onset, aside from the COGS and the overhead piece, is like operators like myself that are bringing them forward want products that we can consume, right?
Yeah, fair.
I'm drinking 5 to 10 of my own drinks, and then I'm just super hydrated. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just starting to get an effect, right? So like, part of it is, yeah, I think operators catering to themselves, and who are those early consumers, right? The earliest consumers that are going to go to a dispensary are cannabis consumers already, and typically those consumers are higher tolerance. So that's where the hemp beverage really is helping open up that conversation, because yes, the broader audience, I've always said, I am in the minority, 100 plus milligrams. I know there's people like me, we're friends, but the large majority is not, right? If the 80-20 rule prevails, at best, we're 20% of the market and 80% wants a 1, 2, or 3 milligram drink. So, but part of it is the cost of the input, and you need to kind of balance those things as you're distributing it. So that's where,
Which is exactly why I love the idea of liquor stores having the lower dose, right? Like this makes perfect sense.
Exactly.
It brings more kind of curious folks to the table because they're trying very low dose, and it gets the message out there that there's more than just THC and cannabis. Like we are just at the tip of the iceberg in finding out in both hemp and the cannabis plant what is in there, what can we use this for, how can it be enhanced for used for wellness, right? Like everyone knew this before we decided to make it all illegal, and now we're sort of getting back to that point, and other countries are doing some really great research, by the way.
Seriously.
So I'm really hoping we can catch up somewhere, but it would be great. And then if we can sell more multi-dose in dispensaries where more users with higher tolerances are going to go, that would be my ideal situation. That would be amazing.
And I think that seems to be, well, I can't say it's a trend. I've seen that is part of the conversation. I think that is one of the pathways we could go. I agree with you. I think it's the way we should go. I think it's long-term how the two, hemp and marijuana, coexist in unison and partnership and sort of in harmony, is that sort of introduction at a traditional retail, the discovery of cannabis, the discovery of I don't want the hangover. I don't want the side effects or the ill side effects of alcohol. I didn't know they had it in beverage form. Now I will go check out my dispensary, find the potentially higher dose, find other products, that sort of discover it. But maybe that's where we can sort of start to bring it full circle here a little bit. Like you guys, you started in a garage, you found wild success, you sold the business, you reacquired the business. What does success look like now to you, like in the future? Like where do you go from here? Because I just think, one, that the story is, I would argue you are an exception, a wild exception, and again, congratulations on all of your success. But I think I'm curious, based on like you've raised the bar at such a level that, like, what does success look like next? Like second act is great, reacquiring LEVIA, you're merging into new markets, like all of that is exciting. But it's almost like as you ride this wave, like how do you stay on it, and where does it go? Do you think what does it look like?
So for me, the goals have really been around destigmatizing and education, right? So like these are hard to quantify and intangible goals, but like, I think when I can walk into, pretty much any state and any bar and have the opportunity of buying a THC seltzer or comparable drink, or talk to the bartender about what strength mocktail I want, and he's able to dose it with our drink drops, that'll be success. That will be that we have changed the conversation. We have changed the perception of what this plant is, its meaning, where it fits in culture. And that to me would be
Here
success, which sounds completely ludicrous, which I understand because you can't quantify it, but those
we are
our goals.
We're back in a bar. Here we
Yeah.
are. Yep. This is
Back in a
full
bar.
circle moment. We're
That's
back in a
right.
bar, and someone's going, it sounds crazy, but good luck to you.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing I just want to compliment or acknowledge too is you've done this as a true partnership in your family. And I think the partnership between you and Kristin is something that, again, is very inspiring. It's very encouraging. But the fact that you've gone through it together, and that you've done it as your family has grown, that you've done it with the team that's around you, I think is a testament to me, at least when I entered the regulatory space for cannabis. It was the thing that sort of struck me most, is that it is such a community. It feels like a big family in a lot of ways. You've got a lot of friends in the space. You've got a lot of friends with their own brands, that sort of thing. But I guess I just want to maybe close with like this journey that you've gone on together, like your relationship as partners, as a couple, as a family, going through the ebbs and flows of that, the uncertainty. Like it wasn't all green lights, as we mentioned earlier, but just how far your family has come together, like your story together. I think, again, it's sort of, there is an inspiration there. There is certainly a testament to your commitment to each other, But again, sort of that partnership, how you've built it together, and also you've brought it from different perspectives. Your marketing background, Kristin's background with addiction services and mental health, and again, I don't know if there's a question there as much as just a statement that congratulations again on that success, but your personal success as well, just as a family and also as someone that had that moment years and years ago, as far as at that bar. It's really, really exciting to see what you've done with it. And so again, congratulations, but also Eric Gunderson. Did I mention they're a Massachusetts brand that has met this success? Is that, do we establish that as a baseline?
Listen, Shawn, you give me. I'm rooting for Massachusetts regulators. I'm rooting for Massachusetts licensees. I love everybody, so you can't score points with me on this one, or try to score points with me on this one. I like these.
You can
types of
already
stories.
buy THC drinks at bars in Maine, so hats off to Maine.
I was saying you guys should come with me next time we go to Minnesota. They're right in line with your
Oh my
vision.
gosh,
Yeah.
I am dying
Yeah.
to get out there. So
Yeah.
nuts.
Eric Gunderson is a consultant extraordinaire, and as states come online, he's certainly someone that they tap into. And the Minnesota's experience, that it's sort of a happy accident in some ways, but one that as they roll out their adult use program, I think a lot of their craft breweries and et cetera have found almost a lifeline in some ways. But I don't know, Gundy, do you want to admit that your fingerprints are on that in any way, or?
Well, first of all, when they legalized hemp, I think I was still working with the state of Maine, but they've made a good go of it. Like it's interesting the dynamics it creates with their regulated marketplace and their low dose hemp edible marketplace, and trying to bring some semblance of regulations and all this and that. But again, at the end of the day, when we're talking about what an ideal state is, the tiered retail model, the fact that we should have cannabis or hemp beverages at the bar, I would venture to guess we have to see what the data looks like on the other side of this thing once we're a few years in. But I would imagine this is going to become a model for other states to follow, maybe not necessarily exactly to a T, but to see what size fits their state based off of the program in Minnesota. And they're a wonderful group, and I've been there so many times. I love that state now.
Yeah.
Enjoy it in February. Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Kristin and Eric, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it. I'm glad that we could have this conversation, share the story with me, and hopefully our listeners appreciate it as much. I think a lot of great insights, and at some point I'll either have to have Shawn track it down for me, or Eric, Kristin, where I get my hands on some of that hot sauce.
You got it. No problem.
Yeah.
Look, again, thank you both. It's great to see you again. Congratulations again on all of your success. I think there are no better stewards of LEVIA than the two of you. So it's really refreshing and reassuring and encouraging to see that reacquisition. Again, as I mentioned at the outset, it's sort of one of those unprecedented, unheard of stories where you brought the brand to success, you carried it through, you stayed with it throughout. And then to see it come back under your stewardship is something that I think is really inspiring for other brands that are looking for that same success opportunity. So congratulations. Thank you for being that example, but also just thank you for being the quality of people that you are, that are committed as you are to destigmatizing cannabis, that are committed to harm reduction. And it's really, really, it's not surprising, knowing you personally, that that's a cause and a mission of yours. But the fact that you're putting the brand behind it and putting your resources behind it. And then I'll just say thank you for your creativity. I think you are moving the market to where it ultimately wants to be and needs to be for long-term success. And it's because of visionaries like the two of you that's going to be possible and capable. So, and again, I think just thank you for engaging with two former regulators that didn't know shit before we started and are still learning today. But, just thank you for engaging with us and joining us here on the hybrid. That's it for our episode. Hopefully you like, subscribe, and do all the things that people do with podcasts. We're still getting used to that as well. So we'll be back soon, Eric and I, with more episodes and more topics that we think you should talk to, think you should learn from, and hopefully some things we should dig into. But until then, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.